All right, Joe and Miranda. Miranda, I'm going to go to you first. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about yourself and the career journey that led you to Raytheon?
Sure. So I'm 27 years old, born and raised in Tucson. I graduated from the University of Arizona in 2019, joined Raytheon in Tucson in 2020, and worked here for the past 4 years. So been in Tucson my whole life. I identify as cisgender and demisexual panromantic, which my exact sexual identity didn't really come fully to understand till about like 3 to 4 years ago. Prior to that, I never really put much thought into it because it wasn't something that I really got, I guess, in general, which, looking back makes sense, demisexual. And I like talking with my friends who are various identities within the Pride community. It was always like, I'm still kind of figuring it out. It wasn't until I joined Raytheon and attended my first Out and Equal session that I learned more about the aromantic and asexual spectrum, and it was like suddenly, oh, everything just made sense. The light bulb came on, and it felt great. Everyone has their own unique journeys, but I'm sure we can all relate to just how good it feels when it clicks and everything makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Miranda, I'm going to give you a couple minutes to get your camera turned on. And then, Joe, I want to go to you with the same question. Has your journey been like to get to Raytheon? And what do you think our audience should know about you today?
So unfortunately, Miranda's in a closed area, so she can't have her camera on. So it'll
No
be
worries.
that's okay. So I was also born and raised in Tucson, Arizona. I did my undergrad studies at the University of Arizona. Kind of growing up, like I attended Catholic school from like kindergarten all the way through high school, and came out as gay when I was 16. I've been with Raytheon for 17 years now. So I started as an intern between my sophomore and junior year of college. And then since the Raytheon I was working at was in Tucson, I just kind of never left. So I kind of transitioned from an intern to a tech hire during my junior year and just kind of been sticking around ever since. Um, so the last 11 years, I've now been in San Diego, California, although I'm in Tucson, Arizona right now visiting family, so enjoying the 100+ degree heat. Um, I'm currently a section lead within system security engineering and a principal investigator on one of the three cyber IRADs that we have running for 2024. And then additionally, I'll provide SME support and proposal support, mostly centered on U.S. Navy and U.S. Coast Guard programs.
Okay, very cool. All right, I want to talk a little bit about how Raytheon supports LGBTQIA plus employees. Are there any specific initiatives or projects that have made you feel more safe to bring your full self to work? And if so, could you share one or two of those with us?
I guess I can kick it off. So
Yeah, go ahead and kick it off,
I
Joe.
think like a lot of companies, right? Employee resource groups are a great way to really kind of ensure that you're fostering a community within the workplace. And so ERGs have always been important to me. And more so than just the ERG itself, it's that my functional leadership, so my department manager, my center manager, while they might not be really involved with the Pride ERG, are very involved with other ERGs like our women's group. And so being able to see that within your leadership chain, I think is very important. And gives you a sense of belonging and an openness to be able to express yourself fully. Um, One other thing I know a lot of companies have like non-retaliation policies, and those are really meant probably more for being able to raise big issues at work. But I think the fact that they exist also means that you can bring your whole self to work. And if there are issues with that, you've got your functional leadership to back you up and say, you know, that's not the way that we treat our employees. If there's an issue, it can be addressed fully. Um, and I mean, I think there's other kind of like ancillary benefits which were beneficial, right? I've got a 5-year-old daughter through adoption, and so I used our adoption assistance program, which was phenomenal, and definitely kind of helped cover some of those costs. So I think those are kind of the big things that I've seen make an impact at least.
I think those are excellent. I mean, adoption assistance alone is really cool and something that, definitely the last, I would say 3 or 4 companies that I worked before Power to Fly not a thing. So I think that is absolutely wonderful. Miranda, how about you? Are there any specific programs or initiatives that have made you feel free to bring yourself to work or made you feel like you were absolutely supported in your whole identity by Raytheon?
So I'm gonna ditto Joe's sentiments about the ERGs. I think we're both very active in our local site ERGs, which is great because you just find that local community connection with members of the community. So ditto those sentiments 100%. And then on top of that, there's several initiatives just over like the past few years that the ERGs have really gotten to push forwards in the company. So like one off the top of my mind I can think of is pushing for more gender neutral bathrooms on many of our sites across the country in general. And that's, I think, one of my favorite initiatives to talk about, and I'm so excited to just keep continuing. Obviously, you can't just do it 100% right off the bat. It takes time. You got to get permits. You got to, all that fun stuff. But it's one of my favorite ones I'm excited to see continue.
I love that. And I think, it kind of goes to show that sometimes not necessarily it's the things that'll have the most impact, but it's really easy to think big, right? And think like, okay, what can we be doing? We want to make sure that we're sponsoring and we're like, providing like gender inclusive healthcare, and we want to do this and we want to make sure everybody feels welcome. But a lot of times it's those small steps that add up to the biggest, like in the moment change for a lot of the people that you're trying to help, right? I mean, a bathroom alone does not seem like a very big deal until you can't find a bathroom you can use. And then all of a sudden, it's a very big deal. So I think it is really important that, like you said, we talk about the big stuff, but also the small things that companies can do to really make everyone feel welcome, included, like they have access to everything that everybody else does. And so I think that's a really good point. Thank you, Miranda, for chiming in there. All right. Now, I obviously the theme or kind of the focus of June's summit is pride, right? We're here to talk to our LGBTQIA family. Now I am not someone within the tent. I am an ally. But I want to know what advice each of you would have for colleagues who want to be better allies to their LGBTQ coworkers. Joe, do you want to start us here?
I can. I think this is probably one of the harder questions, right? A few years ago, I would think that maybe I would say that it's just about treating us like you would any of your other colleagues. I've got a daughter, and so we can relate very easily on the joys and the struggles of raising children, right? Just as you would any of your, straight colleagues. But I think in the last few years, there have been a lot of things that are coming up that make it much more difficult, whether those be laws or just sentiment around the country. Um, I know at least a couple of instances within like the San Diego community, which is very progressive, right? And we've got Hillcrest, the big gay neighborhood, but I take my daughter to a drag story hour, right? And there's protests outside. We have a LGBT family friendly Halloween party in Hillcrest, and there are protests outside. And so, at least for those two big events, there have been like walls of love erected, right? We have LGBTQ plus allies that are trying to make it a very family friendly event and block out all the hate. And so I think it is more now than just being nice to us, right? And having a flag, if you can take those actions, which may be uncomfortable, and stand up or show up for us, I think that in today's day, unfortunately, it's more necessary than it might have been even 5 or 6 or 7 years ago.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that's one of the things that people do hit. They have a problem, especially if they are in the ally community, but not necessarily part of the like alphabet mafia demographic. If there's parts absolutely where your allyship or your activism starts to feel very uncomfortable, but if you step back and like decenter yourself from the issue, I think a lot of allies, a lot of us will find that the reason that we're uncomfortable or the reason that it doesn't feel great is because you're having to internalize and really consider what other people are going through when they don't feel supported, when they are not represented, when they're not getting the help that they need. And so running up against that is like, oh, this is uncomfortable. Well, yeah, it is, because you're stepping outside of your comfort zone and your bubble. Miranda, how do you feel about this? Are there certain things that allies should be doing, especially in the workforce, to make sure that their colleagues feel supported?
Yeah, so I think y'all touched on something important there where there's allyship and then there's advocacy. I think as an ally, when you step up and take those actions to be more active in the community, that turns more into an advocate. So you're actively doing something to make a change or support or increase safety in some situations of the people who are actually part of the community. Now, for individuals who maybe are just looking to start their allyship journey, I guess, some of the easy things that I tell people is like, share your pronouns, include them in your signatures. It's an easy way to just show a visual support of, hey, by the way, if you need somebody to talk to, just kind of thing. In general, if you see something, say something. Don't just, twiddle your thumbs and say, oh, I look away, I didn't see that kind of thing. Join
Well,
your
that whole thing of
employee
like, well, I
resource
didn't
group.
say it. And it's like, no, that's not
Right.
okay.
Exactly. Look into joining your ERGs, look into joining local Pride community resource groups. There are a lot of ways for people to get involved, even just baby steps.
Mm-hmm.
You just got to look for them.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. All right, Joe, from your perspective, are there any common pitfalls that allies should try to avoid?
So I think that's a good question. I think that it's a lot about making sure that you're being respectful of the community. Sorry, Miranda, do you mind? My 5-year-old decided to wander into the room for a second. Can you take this real quick and I'll circle back in a second?
Yeah, I got it. So pitfalls. I think a lot of the times the one thing that I see allies struggle with is sometimes being afraid to ask questions. To Joe's point, like being respectful about the questions you're asking is important. But if you're curious about something, don't be afraid to necessarily ask. Do a little bit of research first, right? The internet is a great place, but don't be afraid to come out and ask somebody. I've had people at work, like I have the Progress Pride flag hanging on my desk, and I've had people come up like, I've seen the regular red through purple Pride flag, but what's this one? Like, what does this mean? And that a simple question like that gets into so much. Like, why do we have the trans flag on the Progress Pride flag? Why do we have the black and brown stripes on the Pride flag? That already starts a conversation.
Yeah.
So I think don't be afraid to ask questions.
I like that. I think that's a very good one. It also is important to remember, like, if you're trying to not center yourself in the discussion, make sure you're being as respectful as possible when you're asking the questions. And even like start it off with like, hey, I have a question about the pride flag. Can I ask you? Like, even just giving somebody context is a little bit easier, because then, yeah, it shows that you are genuinely curious and interested in the answer, but also you're not pressuring that person or putting them on the spot of like, I'm going to ask this question and you have to tell me whether, you have to give me an answer right away. So I think that I very much like that advice, Miranda. Joe, what about you? What pitfalls do you think are really common for allies to fall into?
So I like what Miranda said, right? I think coming from a place of respect and the way that you approach things is everything. And then additionally, even just like out in the community, right? Like I think that it's important to understand that you're going into like an LGBTQIA plus space that might be someone's safe space, and to not take up all the air in the room or not feel entitled um, in an area where you're pushing out somebody else that might be going to that for a specific reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really, really good point. I know we talked to a ton of great people yesterday as well. And that was one of the big things that I took from it for sure, was that like as an ally, especially if I'm going into like ERG spaces or something that is for a specific demographic of which I'm not a part, but I want to support, like you need to make sure that you're going in, you're not centering yourself in the conversation, right? We want to make sure that we're centering the group that is there for help, that everybody is here to support. So you want to make sure that they're being centered and not yourself as the ally. You want to make sure that you are listening. You ask more questions than you say things, because it's not your field. It's not your room, right? You're a guest here. So you want to make sure that you're participating, but not overshadowing anyone else or assuming things, rather, ask the people there. And then the other thing that I like to touch on is this idea of like virtue signaling or performative activism, right? And how quickly good intentions can go in that area. And it really just kind of breaks down to, are you spending more time on the activism and the things that will help, or are you spending more time on the presentation of it? Do you care what it looks like more than you care about the impact? At least for me, that's been a good guiding post for myself if I'm trying to both raise awareness, but also not center myself in the discussion. Let's see here. Oh, okay. One more question. Do y'all have what is your favorite question that you've been asked by an ally recently? I know, now you gotta think. Miranda, I
Yeah,
know
I
we
gotta
kind of
think
got
about
yours
that
already
one kind of.
with the pride flag, but has there been any other questions that an ally has asked you that you were like, oh, that's actually a really good question?
Well, I think one, so I started in my introduction saying like my sexuality, which is demisexuality, panromantic, which aren't terms many people are familiar with,
Mhm.
let alone separating it into sexuality and the romance as part of it. So two separate kind of parts of your identity. So I think when I share that a lot, some people just aren't familiar with it. So just asking like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
So I get that question, and I like when I get that question because it allows me to share a little bit more about, okay, this is what it means to be Miranda, I guess. But yeah, so that question, I guess, on top of the, hey, what does a pride flag mean?
That's a good one. I always like when people's questions are, oh, I don't know what that is. What is that? Because, if you feel like explaining it, great. If you don't, especially with something like that, like it's a terminology. So it's pretty easy to be like, oh, yeah, I'll send you a Google link. This is, you can learn some more about it here. Joe, how about you? Are there any questions that you've been asked that are particular, like, especially by allies that are particularly like thought-provoking or that you really appreciate being asked?
So maybe not thought provoking, but I was at an event for our Asian Pacific Islander ERG that their month was directly before Pride. So right at the end of their month, we had a meeting, and one of the people from that group were, just trying to talk with me. They were an ally, obviously, but about why pronouns were so important and those kinds of things. And it's like, well, I mean, you wouldn't want to be misgendered either, right? You would politely correct them, just like you know they might do to you, right? It's all about respect and understanding how people want to be addressed. And so I think that was an interesting discussion. It was a person of a certain generation, and so they maybe didn't understand the importance that gets placed on gender and pronouns and misgendering someone and why it would be a big deal. So it was at least an interesting conversation, even though it maybe wasn't brought up in the kindest way or the most gentle way. Um, at least it was a good sharing experience to be able to kind of talk about those things and say, just like you wouldn't want to be, called the wrong pronoun. I mean, I think, we can get some common ground here and we'll work through that. So it was interesting, at least.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that I honestly, I like those encounters when they're a little bit awkward. Because for me, awkward is where we grow, right? If you're unsure, if you think that you are steady, right? You know everything about a given subject, you're not going to be curious anymore. And you're not going to keep looking in the places to figure out, okay, what don't I know about this, this topic or whatever. Whereas if you leave yourself room to know that you don't know everything, then the more outside of your comfort level, the more you're learning. You're exploring different parts of the world. And I think that's absolutely wonderful. Um, all right, Miranda, I want to go to you first. How have you navigated the balance between being open about your identity as well as maintaining professionalism in a corporate setting? Obviously, your sexuality is core to who you are, but we don't always bring every facet of ourselves to life or to work. We don't always want to highlight every facet of ourselves in the work world. I can be a real goofball, but I don't want that to be the first thing they learn about me if I want to make sure that they have confidence that I'll do a good job for their event. So how have you handled this for yourself? What has that looked like over the course of your career?
Yeah, so for me, and I think for a lot of folks from my generation, we don't expect any less from our companies than being fully inclusive and acceptive of who we are. And I think that's definitely something that's evolved over, I guess, maybe even just the past decade. Like there are studies showing like 30% of college graduates are identifying as queer in any shape or form. And that's like a number that's tripled over the last decade alone. So I think that already shows like people are feeling more comfortable in one, just being comfortable with who they are, and to like sharing it and announcing that. So I think that's critical, especially like going forward for companies to realize is that like this is not, we're not going to change who we are to fit the image you want us to be or whatever that might be. So I think definitely while I've been at work, like I said, I have the flag literally hanging right behind me. I don't hide it at all. But there also are instances where I'm a little bit more cautious about, you know, coming out and saying right away, hey, I'm part of the LGBTQ plus community. I think that goes in any case, not just at work. I think that's in life as general. Just I don't know who I'm talking to when it's a stranger. Like I don't know what your beliefs are or how they might differ from mine, or even be negatively impactful to who I am and the way I want to live my life. So I think that there's always that little thing in our minds at the end of the day in general. I do find myself sometimes thinking like, you know, if I'm a high performer, it's not, I don't have to fear like retaliation or anything of that nature. And I don't think that's a sentiment that isn't unique to me. I think
Yeah.
many people of the LGBTQ community share that sentiment. And I think it's, you know, as we continue to make those changes and improve the overall social acceptance, I guess, of LGBTQ plus community, I think that will wane as time goes on.
Mhm.
But it's, you know, something we all have to fight. And imposter syndrome sometimes, it's, you know, worst enemy, your own worst enemy sometimes.
Oh, of course. Well, and that's the thing, like imposter syndrome is where you absolutely can be your own worst enemy. And then when it comes to that feeling of like it's not even imposter syndrome at that point, right? You're basically falling prey to both imposter syndrome and the model minority myth in the same like sentence. And as we all know, intersectionalities make us beautiful, unique people, but they also put a lot of hurdles or challenges in our paths, especially when you've got multiple intersectionalities layered on top of each other. Joe, how do you feel about this? How have you managed to be open about your identity, but still maintain what professionalism means to you? Because, like we said, like professionalism looks different for a lot of different people. Professionalism for me is coming to work, you know, all excited and jazzed up and ready to go. And for a lot of other people, it might be like three-piece suit, buttoned down, super serious, you know, whatever. So for you, Joe, how have you balanced being open about your identity and maintaining the professional reputation that you want to instill with people?
So unlike Miranda, right? So I've been with Raytheon for 17 years, so I'm like a millennial. I'm mid 30s, right? So I think I thought about it probably a lot more when I was younger. And I'm not sure if maybe that's because I was living in Arizona at the time or because I was a really junior engineer or I was just young. And so like in each situation, right, you're kind of doing this calculation in your head or this guesswork of like, how much do I trust the people I'm around? How friendly are they going to be to what I say? And so it's kind of like a feeling out process on how open I want it to be. And I think that's the interesting thing right about being LGBTQIA plus, right? It's not as if you come out once and it's done and you're good to go, right, within the corporate world, right? On each new assignment you're on in each new program in each new situation, you're kind of having to do this calculus, at least I did, you know, kind of coming up on how safe do I feel? How open can I be? How much can I bring myself to a given situation? And so I think I thought about it a lot more when I was younger than I probably do now. As I've gotten older, right, and I'm now into more of a leadership role, I mean, I've got a giant 3x5 Progress Pride flag hanging in my office, right? I've got my pronouns, my email signature, and my Zoom calls. I've got photos of my daughter all over the wall. And so I don't even probably think about it these days, at least within the office environment that I'm in. But I think it's important, right, to kind of have those symbols as well to be a safe space for maybe someone that isn't feeling as open at work. And so I think that kind of as I've grown and I've been with the company for so long now, I think I'm trying to at least foster an environment where people feel like it's okay to be themselves and bring their whole selves to work. So I guess it's been a journey, right? Kind of as I've grown and as I've been there. And I don't know if that's, again, changing cultures or just my own more comfortability with who I am in the workplace. But it's been a process.
I'm telling you though, aren't the 30s your best? Like I feel way more secure in myself and who I am. Like I turned 38 this year and I have never felt better about myself, even knowing like all the things I know. And you know, it what you said really, really resonated with me about kind of having to come out multiple times and do that like that kind of mental gymnastics or calculus in the you know in the moment with all kinds of different people. Like I live with bipolar 2 disorder. So it's I hate the terminology, but I am hella mentally ill. And so having to share that with people, I don't have to, but I'm in a lucky enough and resourced enough position. And I'm confident enough in myself that I get to use it a bit as a litmus test for people of, you know, oh, are you going to pop off with some kind of unhinged, you know, problematic things to say about crazy people? Or are we going to have this conversation and then we will move forward both knowing that we respect each other in the given space and it doesn't matter like the other intersectionalities we're bringing to the table. It's not like they don't matter, but they're not going to be a detriment. And so oh man, I can only imagine how that must feel to do that in so many situations, knowing that you are taking that chance every single time. You know, if you are not in a resourced enough position, or if you are not confident that your job is secure, that could be very, very, very scary on a daily, if not hourly basis. So yeah, I think that is, thank you. Thank you, Joe, for sharing that with
Yeah, I
us.
mean, even just this past weekend, right? I go to a progressive church, and so I was at like a summer solstice party with just me and my daughter, and I was talking to one of the people that were hosting, and you know, and it came up that you know, I'm in the process of a divorce, and I was like, oh, from my husband, and so he was like, oh, okay, like, but it's again like that. It's a how do I feel? Where are we at? You know, how is this going to react? You know, so it's always something that, you know, if it's not very, very visible, right, that people don't, you know, then you're having to do that calculation throughout your entire lives on all these different situations that you're in.
Yeah. Well, and it's like a weird social contract balance too that
Yeah.
you're trying to strike too. So it's yeah, it's dicey for sure. Okay, we only have 3 minutes left, so I want to make sure we answer this last question. What changes or improvements would you like to see in the corporate world regarding LGBTQIA inclusion and support? Miranda, do you want to go first?
Sure. So I guess one thing in the nature of just seeing more representation from senior leadership and that kind of stuff. Like, for example, me and Joe are in the same department, and now he's in San Diego now. So right when I joined from in Tucson, I didn't see him initially, but when I learned, like, oh, Joe's part of the community and he's in my department and he's part of senior leadership, I was like, yes. Like, it was so exciting for me. And in general, there's a small percentage of senior leaderships that are part of the LGBTQ community in general. I think there's maybe one member of our C-suite that is, but I would love to see that number grow larger, and I think that's through an active, like, making sure we're going to hiring conferences that are particularly for, like, focusing on the LGBTQ community. And now we do go to those communities, or to those conferences as Raytheon or RTX, various business units. So continue to do that and make sure we're making an active effort towards those hiring practices.
All right. I like it. Joe, how about from your perspective? What do you think companies like Raytheon can do as they continue to evolve and they want to set the example for others?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things. So number one, like Miranda said, I think visibility from our leadership is very important. Going to conferences, budgets are always tight, right? And anytime you're going to a conference, you're pulling from whatever your profit is within a company, right? But prioritizing DE&I separate and above from just your traditional like work-based conferences, I think is important. We've been able to fund those, although it's been tighter each year, which is unfortunate. And so I think continuing to fund those activities is very important. And I think metrics are also very important. So I know that we've changed systems and we're using Workday now. And within Workday, you can have self ID where you can ID that you're part of the LGBTQ plus community, that you're cis or trans. And I think continuing to encourage people to do those things such that we get better metrics within our workforce, I think is also very important.
Excellent. I love, love, love to hear it. All right. So if anything that we've said today about Raytheon has sparked your interest, I very, very much encourage y'all to go take a look at Raytheon's company page on powertofly.com. They have some really amazing opportunities happening, and I think it'll be very interesting for everybody involved. But if that's not you and you're not actively job seeking, I still recommend you check them out, y'all. It's a very interesting company, and I always get to talk to brilliant people from there. So Miranda and Joe, thank you both so much. This has been wonderful. I really appreciated both of y'all bringing your full selves to this discussion, and just cannot wait to hopefully get to do this again soon.
Great. Thank you so much.